was an amazing presentation, Charles. Thank you for that. Find someone who looks at you the way Charles looks at typefaces. That's the biggest takeaway of today. Hi, everyone. My name's Tom. This is my community service for stealing fonts when I was in college. Welcome to Brand Talks as well. I'm honored to be here in front of you all. Thank you to Monotype for inviting me here today to talk about Eventbrite. So for those who don't know, Eventbrite is a ticketing platform and an event marketplace that's been around for over 13 years. I've been there for about 8.5 years now, so I'm the Gandalf of design at Eventbrite. I was going to have a Gandalf slide, but I decided against it. So I started off as the first UI designer at Eventbrite, designer number 4. The company was around 100 people. We're around 1,200 people worldwide now. Not the design team, the company design team. We have brand and we have, I wish. No, we have brand and we have product design at Eventbrite, and we're a global team. So we have product designers in San Francisco, Mendoza, Argentina, Nashville, Tennessee. These are getting increasingly exotic. Madrid, Spain, and Vienna, Spain as well. So Eventbrite's mission has never changed since I've been there, which is to bring the world together through live experiences. And I think as a lot of companies pivot and change over time, or markets shift and they have to get scrappy and find their footing, there's a fundamental good to that, which I think speaks to the value of the company itself. And here we are gathered together in a live experience, one that's geeking out over typefaces, of course. And so in my time at Eventbrite, I've handled everything in the product from the consumer side, which is people purchasing tickets and experiencing events, to the creator side, so people who are making those events and tracking the analytics and getting paid out. I more recently have been focusing on the creator side and specifically on the music side of the business. So music is focused specifically on the venue clients or the independent venues that make up the world, specifically in North America right now, but expanding there. So with music and with a lot of cool people that are tattooed and leather joining the company, it's less so of a hello and more so of a rock out sign. I have 100% more emojis than you did, Charles, in your presentation. So our recent offering has been called Eventbrite Music, which is a music platform for venue creators that are both promoters, organizers, people who are marketers, building out the solutions so that they can be successful for their small independent venues and getting people to attend those shows and sell those shows out. We have a mantra that we've been communicating to these teams around just power to the independents. It's for the makers, the doers, the people who just happen to get paid for doing the things they would have done anyway regardless. And so just setting up me and my role and responsibility at the team. For this kind of quick little story today, you could think of this as a 2-part talk. We're going to be discussing Eventbrite's recent brand evolution and visual direction that we went in as a benefit of working with NEUE PLAK. And then we could also talk about the NEUE PLAK implementation. So this is a little more of the technical side, how product design engineering worked on actually rolling this out to the public. You could also look at this talk in 2 ways, which is the snazzy looking part, and I was going to say the boring case study part, but it could actually be interesting too. So building a brand. So prior to actually 2018, we had a brand framework that we based a lot of the building blocks of who we were on. And when we decided in early 2018 that we wanted to kind of revisit evolving the Eventbrite brand, we looked at this brand framework around, if you think of it as kind of like the core and amplifying out, you always start with the mission of what the company is. And then from there, the vision. And then from that vision, you define those core values, brand narrative, brand characteristics, which can be everything from point of view to tone of voice, the brand identity, and then how you express those things throughout your various parts of your business and organization. For today, I'll largely be talking about the characteristics and the brand identity. Those are the more visualized stuff, and I also spoke to the mission earlier. So again, like that mission was the easy one because that did not change or evolve in terms of the direction that we want to go for the future of our company. But when it came to defining our characteristics, we talked to our employees in our global organization. So I mentioned that we have 5 primary dev centers, but we actually have over 15 different offices throughout the world too. And so these are the people who live, speak, and breathe who we are as a company and an offering. And so we did tons of exercises where we actually went to all of our different offices, had them identify what characteristics spoke to who we are as a brand. We talked to clients, and we ultimately pulled that all together to identify who we are. And so what we identified was 4 primary traits that define that. And so one of the ones was around being adventurous. So infectiously bold in the pursuit of brilliance. And so as we bring ourselves to a product, and as we bring ourselves as a brand, how do we communicate that to the world and communicate that? The next one, purposeful, like an important lever to adventurous, right? Lives, works, and plays with intention and sincerity. So if you have an adventurous friend that goes bungee diving or skydiving, that's not very purposeful and very risky, right? We want to try to balance these things off. So think of us as that friend that actually travels a lot and inspires you to travel as well. Original. So having that finger on the pulse of the culture and a fresh perspective. This is a hard one. This is more of that je ne sais quoi to it, like you have it or you don't, where if you look at the brands that defined originality and how they push that forward and how we try to push that forward with our brand and how we present ourselves. And then finally, welcoming. So easy to love and a delight to spend time with. So with those 4 characteristics, even as your brands, it's really fun to actually say if your brand was a person at a party, who would that person be? And so for us, these words actually culminated in who we thought we wanted to be at that party, talking to our customers and presenting ourselves to the world. And so when it came to actually picking a typeface that represented that, typefaces are sort of the foundation of your brand, right? It needs to accurately reflect the things that make you you. And so for us, with these characteristics, looking at what those were, we started looking at typefaces that accurately reflected that. And so we picked NEUE PLAK as our choice of a typeface, and a relatively new one that was revisited in the same year that we actually started implementing it as well. And so the key important factor about the typeface is that it's supposed to be variable. We want to be original. We want to be adventurous. There's a dynamism to it that typefaces need to be consistent, sure, but it also needs to be as expressive as can be. And so we use a variety of those weights and widths, more so on the brand side, to a degree on the product design side as well. And this allows us the freedom to be flexible in a mood and content while retaining that look and feel. And so how we structured that from the brand design team, we looked at a core version of that. So we have the main NEUE PLAK, and then we looked at all the complements, so the compressed, the condensed, and how those shape and form together to provide as much dynamism as possible. Again, I mentioned on the product design side, we have, it would be not a performant user experience to have all 60 weights of a typeface loading for every single page. So we have a pared down version of those that map to this as close as can be as well. And so a couple of examples of how, when we were exploring how it could look like, playing around with using the same typeface, but playing around with that family and really getting a sense of how those characteristics can flex and can grow to that. Also, make it happen is kind of our mantras we've had since the beginning of Eventbrite, so we had to, of course, take a look at what that was, and of course, behind on orange anyway. So with the visual system as we were building it out, we looked not just at the typeface, but at another fundamental, which was color. And so what we identified was updating some colors that we had in the past, but then identifying a system that could actually start creating more themes that we could flex across the board. So this is our core color palette, but we had other color palettes that we could use not just for verticals or categories, but for the expressiveness that we were really looking for. And so we have edgy, which edgy we've used a little bit on the music side, as you could imagine. Again, getting back to the tattoo and leather-clad people, the opposite of me. Mellow, so again, more of the yoga parties and more of the 4th of July events. the vibrant nature of what endurance events could be, for instance. And then finally, smart. So how we present ourselves to conferences or performing arts. And so we had all of those pieces in the identity work that kind of made up the initial starting points of things. There are other stuff that I don't have here that we looked at around illustration, iconography. Those are all things that are still works in progress. Similar to typeface, illustration in a global brand, for us at least, wants to be dynamic as well. And so we're still looking at ways to flex and capitalize how we can make these sorts of things feel as true to nature as possible. So that was the good-looking part. The next part is around actually NEUE PLAK's implementation. And so to talk about that, I kind of want to take a step back and communicate how I've been involved in all typefaces chosen over our company's time. We actually started, I feel like a lot of companies, with Helvetica NEUE as the system font that you end up using everywhere. But I've worked with the type foundries that we've had contracts with and partnering with marketing and product design for the implementation, from our original style guide to our design system that we have today. And so back when I joined in 2011, we were looking for a typeface that represented our brand, being very playful, being very I guess at the time AT&T also chose that typeface, so that's the one that you always see on the ads. So that was just unfortunate. But we had Omnis Pro, which was from Darden Studios, and we implemented it on the product design side from Typekit when that was first introduced and started back in the day. In 2014, we found the pains of using a display-first typeface, especially within the product, and we wanted more of a workhorse typeface. And so we looked at a number of different workhorses, but we wanted to make it a little more geometric. We wanted it to be a little more usable across the product and not just more of the brand expressive side. And so we ended up working with Font Bureau and WebType as the implementation for that. We also got a little more sophisticated with our implementation and rollout and actually used our own CDN to host the typefaces ourselves, which allowed us to optimize the performance and allowed us to maximize the speed, especially compared to making a call to a third-party service, for instance. And then in 2018, which was last year, particularly in September, we rolled out NEUE PLAK, working with Monotype to actually implement that. So you can kind of see the history of our typefaces that we've chosen to date. So in selecting NEUE PLAK, as a foundation for any design system, from print to digital, it was vital to find that typeface that aligned with the characteristics of who we were, as I mentioned before. So we explored a number of typefaces before landing on NEUE, and we found that it needed to align with those things, and it was a balance of humanistic and a workhorse for multiple design teams. So the brand design team from the get-go worked with product design to make sure that the typeface could flex to not just our web experiences, but our also native iOS and Android ones as well. And then finally, we needed that dynamism, as I mentioned, for marketing and brand context, but still needed to function within applications and still needed to have that consistent experience from billboard ad all the way to actually an account settings page in the product. So as any good story, there was a complication. We wanted to launch the rebrand before becoming a public company. And we had just signed on the dotted line with Monotype, but we realized that was within 45 days. So as anyone who has played a part in their company in rolling one of these things out, that's a very short window. So we had a number of development teams exclusively focusing on this initiative. So we had a dedicated design system team in general that was understanding the implementation on the product design side. We built our design system and our product in a way that actually could have a general effective rollout. For those familiar with the design system, change a button somewhere else, it ripples out everywhere. And we wanted to make sure that other teams as well, in terms of those key customer touch points, also updated their pages to accommodate that too. So if you think of things like the homepage, the storefront of your product, if you think of other areas like the organizer or the consumer apps that we had, like making sure that those visually aligned, not just with the typeface, but actually visually aligned and updated to that as well. So we looked at typeface, we looked at colors, we looked at basic components like buttons and such to update in that launch. And so we came up with a plan. We wanted to be as aggressive as possible on getting this done 3 days before we introduced ourselves as a public company. No danger in any way, shape, or form by that rollout and timing. So again, like we had a design system team, we had a number of squads or feature teams devoted towards building out new versions of these pages to accommodate that new visual system. So once we implemented the initial font files provided to us on the web, and web, iOS, and Android, we noticed that there were some unique characteristics of the typeface and how it didn't quite align, literally, with our previous typeface being used, which was Benton Sans. And so, as you can see in these screenshots on our Android Organizer app, on things that are kind of single line, like on the right side of our dashboard screen, not much change is jumping around, but as soon as you start looking at things that are 2 lines, like Kyle's barbecue, things are starting to shift. And we were a little alarmed by that because that can cause a rampant amount of QA, and we just didn't have that time, or we didn't have the luxury of actually going in every single instance and adjusting those things. And so upon closer inspection on Android, we noticed the spacing above the typeface was affecting UI components and becoming more obvious inside of containers aligned next to icons. So you could look at something like our already aligned close button inside of the pill for this tag, and the text being pushed down a little bit further on it. Or even on the same screen that we mentioned before, you can see how dashboard, which is supposed to be centered to that icon, wasn't necessarily lining up there either. So Monotype was extremely helpful in delivering these test fonts to us to explore and iterate on. And so we were surprised by those initial results and the line spacing variation between those typefaces. And so they were helpful with us on adjusting the ascenders, the descenders, trying to get this right on Android, which again, on iOS and web, we're looking fine. But on Android, we were seeing that anomaly and not understanding why. So our initial recommendation was, if you adjust the ascenders and descenders slightly, you might get it a little more in line with Benton Sans. We could plug and play. We'll be done. We can move on. No big deal. We have like 7 days. Come on. No problem at all, again. So they delivered us updated versions of their test font files, and it still looked like this on Android, even after receiving the new test files with the adjusted metrics. A mystery is afoot. Our engineers, being really good engineers, i.e. detail-oriented, they built a small app that actually tested the system font on Roboto, on Benton, on NEUE PLAK, to see what was causing this discrepancy on Android. As you can see with the font viewer app that Levon had built, you can see the box at the bottom is jumping around when it gets to the NEUE PLAK sizes. And we were just curious like what these metrics were and how they differed from the ones being used on web and iOS. And so upon closer inspection with the Monotype team, in which we had frequent meetings, weeks to discuss this, because they were learning as we were learning as well, we discovered that Android OS actually looks at 2 different values compared to web and compared to iOS when it comes to the Y-min and Y-max. I think they actually look at, I believe technically it's win ascent and win descent. And so so in layman's terms, the liney things weren't matching up. And this is how I was very proud of this slide. I turned this around to my wife, and she's like, "Who is this for?" And I was like, "Really professional, smart people." She's like, "Good job." So again, it's a little small here, but if you actually look at Roboto, which another clarity I should say is Roboto is Android's typeface. Android's typeface and grid system and vertical system was very similar to ours. And so when we initially were referring to Roboto as a space to get more aligned towards, it was because the web and iOS ones would fall into place if we got this one correctly as well. And so when we were looking at these liney things, we were noticing that the ascent and top on Benton Sans was quite different from the other ones. And so it wasn't that NEUE PLAK necessarily wasn't the right one. It's that the one that we were basing all of our spacing with was actually faulty to begin with as well. And so again, as native is relatively new land, and as we're constantly developing and learning these things, we're kind of growing together into what works and what doesn't in these systems. And so working with Monotype and getting an updated version, you can see version D for where we were, they adjusted the YMin and the YMax of NEUE PLAK and NEUE PLAK text, which was the other font file that we were using, and the numbers matched. Everything lined up. And our engineers, being incredibly eloquent whenever they write an email, and they were so exuberant, they were so amazingly excited, responded with a lengthy email to this victory. Which really undercuts how epically amazing this was that we were able to deliver what we needed to. And so on September 17th, we launched our updated design system with NEUE PLAK and our new visual system across our web experiences on our homepage, on our checkout experience for attendees, our event creation flow for creators and music venues, as I mentioned I'm a part of, and of course on our native apps, particularly on Android. So, iteration and what's next. So digital software, like fonts, are products that are always iterative. As new technologies and standards are introduced, type and how we use it for brand and products will continue to shift and evolve. It's one of the most exciting aspects of being a digital designer, sometimes frustrating, but the requirement to be continuously adaptable in our environment is really exciting, right? There's always new versions of OSs emerging, new standards that we need to kind of adopt towards and move towards. It could feel relentless, but it's also really exciting to see how these things are improving our lives and accelerating those moments. So at Eventbrite, as we continue to live with and sit with the new visual system and flex it as we get to 9 months of using this, we always want to stay true to our values, which are one of the earlier ones coming from the mission, vision, and values that I didn't get towards yet. And so one of those values is being true to our customer, the creators, the makers, and always putting them first and foremost into everything that we do. And so this is Brandon and Peter from No Kings. They create murals in DC that support the community, and they also create amazing pop-up shops and exhibitions using our platform. Next is building an emotional relationship with our brand. So if you want your product to align with your customer, you need to develop a connection with that customer. How you present your brand and service, whether a typeface or tone and voice, are critical to how they'll perceive you and develop an affinity towards that brand. And then the last one that we resonate with as our values are, as a global company, we choose to celebrate the uniqueness of experiences being created on Eventbrite across the world, from 3-person photo classes to 150,000-person festivals in Brazil. So on the application side, as we continue to break in NEUE PLAK in the brand and product, we're adjusting it to align better to our characteristics and values, especially as we sit with them a little bit more. So we're trying to be bolder and more expressive in our headlines, for instance, on desktop and our mobile experience. Finally, in an increasingly digital world where people are glued to their phones, our mission of bringing the world together through live experiences is more important than ever. So concerts, meetups, events like this, they really help us gather together and stay connected as a society. So as we look at leveraging our brand to connect with humans more than ever, and we look at ways to continue to kind of think outside of that box, we as a company will kind of see how typeface, which is such a fundamental being of who we are as a brand, can be used to kind of continue to showcase who we are and who we want to be to our customers. So thank you guys.